Tell me if this has ever happened to you. You're a game master. You have prepared an adventure for a tabletop role playing game. You've gathered your friends together. You've probably put in quite a lot of work. There might be miniatures involved, handmade terrain and maps, an adventure in a world of your creation. You've poured a lot of work into very simply wanting to create a lot of fun for a group of your friends to come and share with you. And you play, and during play, it's intense. You do all the things. You're very busy reacting to everything that the players are doing and managing all the statistics of all the creatures you may be using. And you get to the end of the game and you don't really know how it went. Nobody is jumping to their feet to applaud you for your contributions, for your enlightenment that they now understand how good a game can be. Nobody's really shitting on you either. They're mostly just, politely thanking you, and off they go out the door. And on the inside, you feel awful. You feel like you may have screwed up. You're afraid that they all hated it. You don't think that they were honest with you when they were politely thanking you and saying good game on the way out, and you're looking for a way to frame this. What's wrong? Are my players not bringing it? Is there something wrong with them because I think I worked really hard on this, or am I just totally missing it and I don't understand how this game mastering thing works? These anxieties are something that happened to me a lot, and it's something that I'm going to term the experience of post-game letdown. If you felt this post-game letdown, this video is for you. My name is Darren Steele, and I'm a game master. I'm a player, and the reason I'm suddenly making videos for game master advice is not because I have anything to offer given character optimization or adventure writing. It's because I have yet to see in a way that I think strongly enough discusses the nature of the emotional and social aspects of a role-playing game. So that's what this series of videos is about. And this one is about vulnerability hangover. Vulnerability hangover is a concept that I'm going to discuss, and I'm going to describe how understanding it and using it to interpret that feeling of anxiety at the end of a game is going to help you stave off the experience of game master burnout, to be a game master with more longevity, and ultimately a better game master in the end. So we've talked a little bit about what the post-game letdown feels like. Vulnerability is very simply the experience of being able to be hurt. And game mastering is something that causes that a lot. I mean, there's a lot of things. Just about anything courageous that a person does opens them up to the possibility of being hurt. For a game master, you put your creativity, a lot of your creativity, and bet on understanding your friends and what will be fun for them out into a space and hope it works. And you're really opening yourself up to be hurt, because when you put that pet project out, that world or that adventure, anybody could tell you that it's stupid, or that you don't know the rules, or you're not very fun to play with, or boring. And that hurts. That's what the experience of being vulnerable is. I think Dungeons & Dragons involves a lot of vulnerability. Tabletop role-playing does as a whole. And I think that's part of why, for a lot of people, it's a kind of transcendent experience, is that everybody at the table can practice that state of vulnerability together, and do really cool things, have a lot of laughs, have a lot of fun. But still, opening yourself up to being hurt means that you can get hurt. So it can also be painful. Now, there's a woman by the name of Brené Brown. She's a shame and vulnerability researcher, and she talks a lot about vulnerability. She says it involves entering a situation in which there's risk, there's unpredictability, and there is exposure. And she also talks about this thing she calls a vulnerability hangover. And that vulnerability hangover is the experience of having done something vulnerable. Examples she gives are giving a public speech, maybe asking somebody out on a date, giving them the opportunity to reject you, a very vulnerable activity. And I think that playing as a game master fits into this too. When you've done something like that, it's totally normal to fear. To fear that you've done a bad job, to fear that you've maybe offended somebody, to experience a desperation for affirmation because you don't really know how it went. And even if people are telling you that it went good, you might suspect that they're lying to you to be polite because they're your friends or whatever. Now, here's what's really important about the idea of a vulnerability hangover. The vulnerability hangover doesn't happen because you did a bad job. It is fear of having done a bad job, but it doesn't happen because you've done a bad job or because people didn't like what you did. It happens because you have been vulnerable, which means that you took a risk. It happens when you've been courageous, when you have tried to do something that's outside your comfort zone. We assume, maybe you assume, that when you're feeling that post-game letdown, which I'd like you to reinterpret as actually a vulnerability hangover, when you're experiencing that post-game letdown, you assume it's because something went wrong and you did a bad job. But if it's a vulnerability hangover, you can instead potentially assume that you did something right, that you did something courageous, that you pushed your boundaries. In the end, it may have been a more or less good session than your average or your best, but pushing yourself a little further and continuing to try on a sillier character voice or improvise more conversations or whatever it is that you've done to take a risk is how you get better at doing what you're doing. So having the experience of the post-game letdown, a vulnerability hangover, is a fantastic thing. Think about it like that. And here are 4 things that you can do that will help you to reinterpret that post-game experience and turn it into a force for good and a force of development of your craft and a way to fend off the experience of getting into a stage of burnout or of not wanting to do this thing anymore. So the first one is to see it coming. Now that you know what a vulnerability hangover is, be on the lookout for it. And at the end of a game, if you're feeling fear, anxiety, desperation for affirmation, resentment of your players for not being vocal enough about what they thought or uncommunicative about the game, call it what it is. Call it a vulnerability hangover. Take a deep breath. It's not going to make those feelings go away, but you can know that they are a sign that something went right rather than something went wrong. The second thing, number 2, that you should do is put the focus on your players. When you get in that headspace, when you're so worried about how it went, it's really easy to shut down and stop paying attention to what's happening in the room. So consciously choose to pay really close attention and actively listen to what your players are saying. Your players may be saying things that are complimentary, or they may be communicating criticisms, but they're probably saying more than you think they are. You're probably in this place expecting them to be incredibly enthusiastic to break through your sort of mind barrier as you're thinking about you don't know how it went. Focus on them and you'll probably figure it out without them having to yell at you about it. The third thing is offer what you need. The players are also asked to be vulnerable when they're playing Dungeons and Dragons or a tabletop role-playing game. They have to do silly character voices. They have to make tactical decisions, which could be right or wrong. They have to improvise conversations. Everybody has different comfort levels, but Dungeons and Dragons asks players to do new things all the time. And so if players are also have been vulnerable and are potentially experiencing a vulnerability hangover, they may be in the same headspace as you and really afraid to tell you that you did a good job because they think that you will tell them that the game was bad and that they're wrong. And that's another risk, another exposure that would be uncomfortable for them. So look for the things that they did right. Find the moments where they took a risk and call those out and encourage that behavior. Praise them for thinking to check under the bed or making a tactical decision or putting on a silly voice or whatever. Put it on them. Find the moments that they did good and you may very well find that the tension in the room sort of evaporates and you can begin to have a more open conversation about the game as they get some of their fears and anxieties sort of spoken to. The last thing that I want you to consider is that in the fallout of a game, in the letdown of a game, at the end of a game, it doesn't have to be a fallout or a letdown, but at the end of a game, you've put out a ton of energy, you've invested an awful lot of emotion and creativity in what you're doing, and this isn't the right time to edit. Number 4 is to give it some time before you start to post-mortem and dissect everything that happened. You've been in creative brain for a long time. You cannot just switch like that into editing and critique brain. You're going to drive yourself crazy. You're going to be an emotional wreck if you jump right into a conversation or even a solo debrief about moment by moment what was good and what was bad. Let it go. Pat yourself on the back for having run the game. It's a really cool thing to do and an amazing skill you're developing and a very generous service activity. Let it go and take a nap. Go for a walk. Start editing tomorrow. You'll be a better, longer-lasting game master for it. And that's all I have to say on this topic. I'm going to talk more about vulnerability. I'm going to talk more about Brené Brown, this shame and vulnerability research. I will put a link to her TED Talk in the description below. And if you like this, and if you think that you would like to participate in more conversations about the emotional and social aspects of the game, please subscribe and please comment. Tell me if you experience letdown at your table and if these change your experience of it. The last thing that I'll tell you is I have a website. It's shadowsofpindus.com. That's Pindus. I will be putting written blogs there. And I am working and going to be launching a live play podcast, which is going to be cool. Very excited about it so far. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and thanks very much for participating in this conversation with me. I hope that your gaming gets better and better and that you continue to do courageous things. Thanks for now.